I'm on today discussing Chicago with Mr. Devin Jones, 18th Ward Republican Committeeman and chair of the Southside Republican Organization. Thanks for joining me today, Devin. Appreciate it, man.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So we got a lot to unpack here. We had the special election last week up in Chicago where Brandon Jones won, displacing Lori Lightfoot as the mayor of Chicago after she presided over a historic amount of record crime and violence that sort of drove the outcome of that election last week. Let's just jump in here. What do you think is probably the biggest takeaway from this election loss for her?
I think that she didn't do enough to get out to the people. That's the biggest takeaway, is that she did not do enough to talk about how her policies and whatever her platform is, how it was beneficial to people. She won most of the majority Black ward. She won a substantial amount. You know, a lot of people think that she just kind of lost, but she did come in third place. The difference is Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson won more heavily populated areas. So Brandon Johnson was able to take over the progressive north side, which is heavily dense. It's a lot of buildings, a lot of apartment buildings and different things like that. And those people are organized. They're Democrats, socialists. They're socialists. Some of them are communists. So they organize and they know the principles of organization. And so he was able to capture that area of the city. Brandon Johnson or Paul Vallis was able to capture the northwest side and the southwest side, which kind of put the two of them over the hump. So we had, I think, 8 or 9 candidates, if you include write-ins and different things like that. And unfortunately, Lori Lightfoot succumbed to a fractured, non-cohesive Black vote, really, because the Black vote was split between Lori Lightfoot, Willie Wilson, Jamal Green, who's a community organizer here, and some of the other people. And so that's really what did her in. I would probably not say that it was her policies.
And we saw shortly after the election, I mean, the political right immediately went on to sort of drag the people of Chicago because, again, they elected another socialist, a progressive Democrat. I mean, the people who have dominated Chicago politics for the last 100 years have been Democrats. They haven't had a Republican mayor since 1927.
Right.
So, and
he was corrupt. If you actually look, Big Bill Thompson, the last Republican mayor, was just as corrupt as the Daleys were. So, but anyway, go ahead.
No, it's all good. No, but it's interesting because there wasn't even a Republican on the ballot. There wasn't another option. No. So I guess I feel like it's a situation where it's a chicken and the egg. We had this change that needs to happen. Let me read you off some things about Chicago, and I know you probably already know this, but Chicago has $46 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. That's more than 45 states across the U.S. Chicago's murder rate is more than 25 per 100,000 residents. That was in 2022, up from 39% since 2019, making it the 13th highest among 75 big cities in the country, the second highest among the 20 biggest cities in the U.S., and is 4 times the national average. Nearly 80% of Chicago public students can't read at grade level. Only 15% of Chicago public school students are proficient in math. And Chicago's been run by Democratic mayors again since 1927. Their 50-member city council has 0 Republicans. The Cook County Board of Commissioners has 17 seats, and 16 of them are filled by Democrats. Democrats have completely destroyed Chicago and have a large role to play and responsibility for all of the negative outcomes that this city has seen. But what does it say? I mean, is it really fair to blame the people when there's not even a Republican or libertarian option on the ballot to choose from?
And that's the issue. So for the first time in 2022 in Chicago, I've been voting since 2004. That's when I turned 18. So up until last year, I've never had really any Republican people on the ballot. When we would go in to pull the primary ballot, it would be almost empty, except for president, Senate, maybe a House rep seat. But and then, of course, in the general, because there were no Republicans in the primary, you only have one person on the ballot. Mary Flowers, who's my state rep, has run unopposed almost her entire time in office. And she was elected when I was conceived by my parents, literally, So that has been the issue, is that we haven't had options. And then when the party does put forward options, there are people who are tone deaf and don't really know the community. So this last cycle, and I know people don't want me to say these things out loud, but I do believe that you have to put sunlight is the best disinfectant. This last 2022 election, they said, we're just looking for warm bodies. Well, warm bodies don't offer tangible policy when as you just read out those statistics, 80% of Chicago public schools students cannot read or do math or do science at grade level. When you start breaking that down by ethnicity, it's even worse. And it's not just in the city of Chicago. 2/3 of public school students across the state of Illinois are not proficient. They are functionally illiterate in this state. And so what does that say about us building the next generation? And then you have the Republican Party that puts forward these candidates that, want to talk about weird issues like Dylan Mulvaney on the beer can. I know that didn't happen in this election, but that's the type of stuff that they say. They put candidates into, let's just say, the Black community, right? And then those candidates are asking me, what should I say? I don't know what you should say. Why did you put your name on the ballot? What is your platform? What policy do you have to offer? I know what I have to offer. I know what policies I want to see. But if you put your name out there, I'm not going to dictate to you what policies you should have. We put candidates on the ballot who couldn't even go out and canvass. They wouldn't go door to door. They wouldn't knock on doors. They wouldn't talk to people. They didn't have printed material. It was just a mess just to have Republicans on the ballot. And so in 2022, we captured the same vote, about 15%, as we did when we didn't have candidates on the ballot. And so it isn't, everybody bears personal responsibility, right? Nobody's telling people to pick up guns and shoot each other. That's a personal choice. Nobody is forcing parents to keep their kids in these schools or not to do everything they can to fight the Chicago public school system. But also, I understand that these parents are going up against a $9 billion institution, and the Republican Party has not partnered with them, has not offered anything. If you go to the Obama Library is coming here. I tried to get the Republican Party to sign on to the community benefits agreement that the people in, I forget the name of I think it's Hyde Park, where they're building the Obama Library. They're displacing hundreds of poor and elderly, mostly Black people. They're destroying a neighborhood to build this library. They're also destroying a historic park. The Republican Party won't even touch that. But if you look at their Twitter or their Facebook, they're talking about things that don't matter. They're making fun of how Lori Lightfoot, calling her Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice is not a policy. Saying no to Brandon Johnson is not a policy. So if you don't believe that his plan works, break it down and tell us how it does not work. Brandon Johnson was able to articulate conservative values because he talked about competent government. He talked about lessening government in certain areas and not enforcing bad policy. That whole reorganizing the police department is not enforcing bad policy. Of course, we know what progressives do, so he's not going to do any of that. But the thing is, it was the difference between someone who espoused semi-conservative values in Brandon Johnson, even though he's a progressive, and Paul Vallis, who just said, I'm just going to put a bunch of police in the Black community. That's what people heard.
So I saw a New York Times article that ran shortly after the election, and they had interviewed some people who were specifically looking for the most progressive candidate on the ballot. So, I mean, that would suggest that for at least some people, even if there were a better option or a conservative option, they still wouldn't have elected that person because they're looking for somebody who's more ideologically aligned with them. So, I mean, does it even make sense for Republicans to try to win in these areas?
It does, if you're able to articulate a tangible policy. The North Side is increasingly organized around progressives. The South Side is not. The South Side is more blue collar. The South Side is more working class. The North Side is where your organizers live. That's where a lot of your colleges are, like DePaul, Loyola, different things like that. So the North Side is primed for that type of, I'm going to look for the most progressive person I could find. You know, I'm not surprised with that. The problem is it's like a political wilderness on the South Side. Nobody wants to come here. And the only people who do come to the South Side to get the vote out are progressives. And they do it by sliding in that, you know, they take their failures in government and then place them on people who were never there. So the reason why public transportation is so sparse, the reason why you have grocery store deserts on the South Side is because of these scary conservative policies that don't actually exist. But because conservatives won't come and make the case, conservatives are just responding to distractions. They never get to put out the story of how we don't need Walmart. We need you as neighbors to open up your own grocery store. Maybe we should reduce the burden of government. Maybe it shouldn't cost as much to get a business license. Maybe the tax burden shouldn't be so high, so that you can open up community-owned or neighbor-owned grocery stores, general stores, so on and so forth. But we let progressives tell our narrative because we won't show up, and when we do, we show up with weird stuff.
So what's the recruitment process like up there as far as getting new candidates on the ballot in an area where they haven't traditionally supported anybody other than progressive Democrats?
Right now, it's just warm bodies. And the South Side Republicans, we are looking for principled conservatives. We're looking for people who care about their community, who have been active in their community. But it's hard for us because we're going up against, the established party, if you will. But they are not looking for, I hate to say it like that. They're just not looking for quality candidates. They're looking for people who agree with what they say and will be controlled by them. And so that's why the whole Illinois Republican apparatus is very fractured and torn into pieces. And so Democrats and progressives are allowed to run rampant across this whole state. So I say all that to say, there is a recruitment process, but it's not a quality recruitment process. Many of these people don't know the principles of organizing, which is a real thing. It's a real science. They don't know how to train these people to go door to door. Things as simple as, how do you get into an apartment building, right? Chicago is a city of 2.7 million people. A lot of people live in condos and apartment buildings. How do we get in there? How do we network with people? How do we organize with people?
Do you think safety is a concern, though? Because, I mean, we see these stats about the murder skyrocketing, and you got somebody who's maybe not from the neighborhood that wants to come in and do something. There's a real threat of physical violence to anybody that's an outsider that might come in, wouldn't you say?
I don't. I haven't seen it. A lot of the violence. I'm not saying that there's not violence. Of course, there is violence, and that is scary. But again, if you're doing politics, I hate to say it, I'm not like a scary person. So to me, if I'm going to be the 18th Ward Committeeman, or I'm going to be the Committeeman or a political operative, if you will, in one of these communities, that's kind of the risk you take. Don't sign up for it if you're scared. If you know that your district goes into Inglewood or Roseland or on the west side somewhere, and then you say, but it might be violent, do not get the signatures to be on the ballot, because that's the risk that you take. I'm sorry, that's just it. And that might be, I think that is a lot of the issue as to why Republicans and conservatives don't go into certain communities. But again, you could sidestep the blocks. I mean, most of the violence, you can pinpoint where the violence is. It's not like on my street, people are just, it's the Wild Wild West, and they just shooting people, because you would hear it right now. It's specific areas, specific blocks, and there's specific gang violence, beefs, and different things like that. So you know where to go and where not to go. Now, on the north side, yes, they are robbing people. They're doing all type of stuff. But again, if you live in Chicago, that's the risk you take. If you want to run for office, I don't know. You gotta do it, or don't sign up for it.
Yeah, it seems like you're saying it's very localized, so it's probably a low probability risk anyway.
Yes.
You decided to get out and be a little bit more active. And, I know people who were sort of urged to go do different types of outreach up in those areas and just declined. I think just out of fear, and it might, again, be an irrational fear. But again, we spend all this time talking about what's happening up in Chicago without doing any work or putting any solutions forward to actually try to solve these problems. I feel like, so let me go over this with you as well. So after the runoff election last week, I saw a stat from ABC Chicago that the voter turnout was only 35%. So even despite the record crime and the underfunded liabilities and all the other problems, the state taxes that are just crushing people, the regulatory burdens that people have to be able to open a business or just operate effectively and independently, even despite all of those things, people just weren't excited to go out and go to the polls. It shows a level of voter depression and a high level of apathy just with the entire political establishment in general. So do you see just a sense of overall frustration with people with the political class up there?
Yes, and 35% is high. If you leave Chicago and go to the suburbs, the voter turnout rate was in some places 15%. So it's not just Chicago. We have municipal elections across the state, and the turnout was abysmal. And among conservatives, it was just even worse. Conservatives just did not show up to the polls. So progressives took over school board races, all in the suburbs, in those areas that we say are not a concern, and it's conservative. The progressives just took over mayorships and boards of trustees, school boards, library boards, fire and police protection districts. But there is a level of apathy here in Chicago, especially when you have progressive Democrat Brandon Johnson against machine Democrat Paul Vallis. Why would we show up to the polls? That is not an option. People make light of this idea of having a lesser of two evils, but the lesser of two evils still leaves you with evil. Whether you're in the inner ring of hell or the outer ring of hell, it's still hell, and there's no hope. And so why would a person bother trying to cast a ballot for when it's just two people that they don't believe in? Of course, they're not going to show up.
Yeah, it's like the only options were left or farther left.
Yes, correct. Yes. Yep. So they just stayed home. Brandon Johnson was able to increase young people voting. I think they went from 4% to 6%, but that's not even 10% of people between the ages of 18 and 34 showing up. That's an entire generation that just doesn't show up to the polls. And so, it's just bad. We've had nothing but machine politics. Back in the day, the Democrats and Republicans carved up the state of Illinois, where Republicans would get suburban areas. As long as they didn't come into the city, the Democrats wouldn't come into the suburbs. And that's how Illinois became this hotbed of Marxism and socialism and progressivism in the United States. It was with the help of Republicans.
And Chicago was sort of the hub that progressivism incubated before it spread across the United States. I mean, the Democratic machine is based out of there, and it's been there since the late 1800s. Yes.
And when you look at universities like the University of Chicago, which is, I call it the Vatican of progressivism. When you look at Northwestern University and even our Catholic universities, DePaul, which is a regional powerhouse, it's a progressive incubator. Loyola, which is the university I went to, another progressive incubator. All of our universities in this area, UIC, They specialize in making progressive activists, and we have not penetrated that these institutions. We have just allowed them to fester and grow, and like any cancer, if you don't cut it out, it's just going to keep spreading.
So what are the solutions? I mean, we again, it's a quagmire because we have a community that needs alternatives, but we don't have alternatives that are on the ballot. We have people who want another option and are staying home because they're so disinterested in voting for two weak candidates. They'd rather just not show up at all. So how do we get out of this? We every single weekend we come out of a weekend on a Monday and people are talking about how many people were killed in Chicago, this and that. So there's some sort of interest from the right, but many on the right, again, for the reasons that we just went over, don't really see a good pathway forward. So you, as being somebody who's a resident there, who's on the ground, and you know people who live there, you're actively in the community, what are the solutions? How do we start to unwind this mess?
I think that's just it. Neighbors who are conservative need to start getting to know their neighbors. So if you're a conservative, and especially if you plan on running for office in Chicago, and for the people who live outside of Chicago, if you're going to support someone who says they're running for office, who's in Chicago or in Illinois, there's a couple of things you have to see. Are you showing up at community, we call them CAPS meetings, but community action policing meetings? Are you showing up when the alderman does a town hall or the state rep does a town hall? Do you know the issues in your specific community? We poured a lot of money into a governor's race. We poured money into federal races and state races, but politics is local. So as a conservative apparatus, are we paying attention to Metropolitan Water Reclamation District? Do we have candidates for that? Do we have candidates for, in addition to aldermen, which we had no candidates for, and mayor, we also, for the first time, elected a police board here. And the progressives just dominated that election. We didn't have any conservative candidates. We're back to blue, but we had no conservative candidates for police board. So every police district was able to elect 3 people that would go to they would make up a police council that basically helps with the mayor to govern the Chicago Police Department at this point, choosing the superintendent of police and different things like that. We're not active in the places where we need to be. When it comes to these special service areas and TIF districts, we don't even know what's going on in our various communities. And so first and foremost, I think that conservatives have to get active in their community at the local level. We have to stop thinking about things at a macro level and go very small. In my 1 square mile neighborhood, what's going on? How do I evangelize conservatism? What do I need to be doing? As far as people who are interested in Chicago but don't live here, you have to start vetting the people that you give money to, because a lot of the conservative Inc., they get money to come here and throw rallies and beat up on how horrible we are, talk about Black people, encoded language and different things like that. And then they fly right out and they're gone. And so people nationwide are giving them money. What'd you say?
What do you mean specifically when you're referring to that?
As far as conservative Inc.? Yeah,
because I don't see a lot of rallies in Chicago.
We do. We had 2. TPUSA is very active here. They've done a couple of rallies over at the UIC Pavilion, but I mean, what does that do? During this election, they had 2 rallies. I think Charlie Kirk came, and then they did one with Darren Bailey, who ran for governor here. And it's like, okay, how did that help with the election? That didn't fire anybody up. Did you even have voter registration? What was the purpose of that? Because if you were going to have a rally, you should have been giving people marching orders as they were leaving there. We did have a lot of rallies in 2020. We had a lot of events in 2022. People don't see it, but Republicans do show up here and throw rallies, but there's just no fruit of it. There's no purpose to it. And so I would honestly challenge us to I am not a progressive. I'm not a socialist, but their tactics, rules for radicals, if you read that and apply them to conservative policy and conservative issues, take those tactics and use them, and we can defeat progressivism. They lay out their playbook for us. So they lay out the pathway to defeat them, but we're too distracted. And so on the one hand, we're bold enough to say all these things about Chicago, but then we're too scared to come into the community because it might be violent. It can't be that. If you're not bold enough to come to the community, then don't put your mouth on the community.
So if the RNC were to make a substantial investment in the Chicago area, do you think it would be reasonable to expect that we could see change within, let's just say, 1 or 2 election cycles?
Not in 1 or 2 election cycles. It would probably take about a decade to see substantial change, because you got to consider this is something that has been, as you said, we haven't had a Republican mayor since the 20s. The last Republican governor we had gave us taxpayer-funded abortion. The Republican governor before that gave us a state income tax. So there is a rebranding issue that has to happen in the Republican Party. We have to introduce ourselves to the community, and then at the same time introduce policy. So this is gonna, I mean, even Jesus, it took him, his ministry was 3 years before he died and resurrected, right? And then it took the apostles the rest of their lifetime to go all throughout the Roman Empire. So again, we have to start thinking in generational shifts and not looking for one-time election victories. Chicago is not a place where we vote for people based off of their so-called policy. We look at, do you actually care about this community? And the basis for that is, have we seen you in this community? If we haven't seen you in the community, you're not getting a vote.
And so just one final question. What do you think is the most important thing that people should take away and consider when thinking about this issue?
Again, I think that politics is local. I think that on the right, we need to do a lot more studying. We need to do a lot more political science, if you will, as to breaking down elections and paying attention to what people are saying. If you look at the South Side of Chicago, I'm of the belief that it is very conservative based off of what people are talking about. You have a lot of people here who have returned from prison. They're more likely to be conservative. They want to get from up under the government. They want to start small businesses. They want their records not necessarily wiped away, but they want to be made whole so that they can be productive citizens. If you look at a lot of the parents, mothers and fathers, they want school choice. These people are clamoring and trying to find ways to take their kids out of that failed public school system. But that's not the narrative. If you look at the homeowners, they're struggling to keep their homes under increasing property taxes. Business owners, small business owners, they're struggling to keep their businesses under business and licensing fees. We're being ticketed to death. And people talk about that, but you never hear that narrative. All you hear is, oh, they voted for Brandon Johnson. Well, yeah, they did and they did. Only 35% of people showed up. So no, 2/3 of people didn't vote for Brandon Johnson. And then on top of that, the alternative was Paul Vallis, who the only thing he said was he was going to put more cops in the community to do what? Enforce already destructive laws, enforce an already corrupt system. So to these people, that wasn't an option. So we have to stop being emotional, start listening to what people are saying, start offering a conservative alternative to progressive problems and progressive solutions. We have to be more strategic. That would be my message, and ultimately fix where you live. So if you're not from Chicago, you shouldn't necessarily be worried about Chicago, because I guarantee your area is being infiltrated by progressives right now.
And as I ask all my guests, if people want to reach out to you and yell at you, where can they find you?
On Twitter at Devio, Devio is my personal. On all social media, you can find the Southside Republicans at Southside GOP. And of course, our website is southsidegop.org. Again, on all social media, Southside GOP. My personal Twitter is at Devio, and southsidegop.org for our website.
Awesome. Devin, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you. Thank you.